Here are some facts about me. I have been suffering all my life. Why? I did not speak to my father for the rest of his life. I lost 4 of my 6 children. I lived only 35 years. All facts are truth. I am Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, an Austrian composer known for my prolific output of symphonies, operas, and chamber music. I began composing at a young age and remain one of the greatest figures in Western classical music. I am ashamed of some things, and some things almost destroyed me. However, it is an integral part of my life. It proves that famous people have the same problems and life challenges as everyone else. Now all about it in more detail. Section 1. I have been suffering all my life. Why? How cruelly the world spins. It is as though my very genius is bound to the strings of poverty, forever pulling at me, dragging me down. For all the notes I've composed, the symphonies that soar, the operas that sing, the music that should lift me to the heavens, it is the weight of coins, or rather, the lack of them, that drags me to the earth. I have composed some of the most intricate and beautiful works ever written. The Requiem, the Magic Flute, the Piano Concertos, pieces that stir the soul, that defy the very essence of music itself. And yet, here I sit, surrounded by debts that taunt me like shadows. How can it be that I, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, the very spark of music in this world, find myself in such ruin? It is as if my talent, that blessed gift bestowed upon me by the heavens, has been cursed by the gods themselves. How cruel that I can fill concert halls, make kings and queens weep at my work, and yet, my pockets remain empty. I've known the glittering world of patronage, of imperial courts and aristocratic support. I was once the darling of Vienna, praised by the emperor himself, and yet here I am, a man of unfulfilled promises, unable to meet the most basic of needs. I have composed for royal courts, I have dined with noblemen, and I have been celebrated as a genius. And yet none of it has protected me from the relentless march of creditors. Why should I suffer for a gift that was given to me? Why should I starve, while the very men who claim to appreciate my work sit upon their wealth? This endless cycle of dependence is not the life I envisioned when I first began to compose, when I was celebrated as the wonder child of Europe. He shakes his head, a dry laugh escaping him. I live in a constant state of uncertainty. Every day, the landlord knocks at my door, reminding me of what I cannot give. My creditors wait, hands outstretched like vultures, ever hungry for what I cannot pay. And he pauses bitterly. I sit here, composing, creating, while my life crumbles beneath me. I should be thriving, should be as grand as my music. And yet, I am a beggar at the gates of fortune. The music I create should be my salvation, but it is nothing more than a fleeting pleasure for others. For them, it is entertainment, it is beauty. But for me, it is the only thing that gives my life meaning, and yet it comes at the cost of my dignity. I run a hand through my hair, exhaustion written all over my face. How could it come to this? I have squandered no fortune. He chuckles darkly. I have not. But the world does not see it that way, does it? The fine clothes, the wine, the nights of merriment with friends. They see only the surface. They do not see the strain beneath it. The nights I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I will keep my family fed, how I will silence the echoes of my debts that haunt me. There is no peace in this, no peace in the beauty of a melody when your very life is dissonance. I have often thought about the contrast between my early years and the man I have become. When I was a child prodigy, surrounded by admiration, I thought my talent alone would protect me. I was applauded by courts, celebrated by royalty, and showered with the promise of wealth and recognition. But where is that wealth now? Where are those promises? They were empty words, mere gestures to placate the young genius, while the world moved on, indifferent to my survival. I think of my youth when they called me a child prodigy, when I was surrounded by admiration, by riches promised by the very weight of my talent. And yet, I find myself here, far from the grand salons I once dreamed of, cast adrift in a sea of unpaid bills and broken promises. He slams his fist onto the desk in frustration. I should be writing the music of the future, not worrying about how to feed my children or whether I will have enough money to pay for the doctor when I fall ill. I have created masterpieces that will last for centuries, yet I cannot secure a decent meal today. The contrast is maddening, and it eats at me day after day. He sits again, gripping his pen tightly. A composer, they say, must create freely, without the chains of the world to bind him. But I cannot be free. Can I? No, my music is not free, nor is my soul. Every note is tainted by the fear that I will die penniless, unknown, as the music I've created fades into the ether. What a cruel jest, to have all the greatness within me and yet to die without a penny to my name, to compose symphonies for kings and emperors and yet, he slams his hand onto the desk again. Still to be left with nothing. My works, my genius, should be enough to secure my place in history, but instead, they have been the chains that bind me to a life of suffering. The thought that I may die in obscurity, my name forgotten, my music no more than a passing fancy for those who had the privilege to hear it while I lived. This is the greatest fear I carry. What if all my efforts, all my compositions are in vain? What if no one remembers me? What if the world does not recognize what I have given? He looks at the pile of bills again, the weight of them almost suffocating. I dream of a day, though I know it is but a fantasy, when I will no longer worry about where the next meal will come from. When my works will be treasured, not as the fleeting whims of a moment, but as eternal treasures. But alas, this day is far from me. I am not asking for wealth. No, what I seek is far simpler. I seek peace. I seek the ability to create without fear, to compose without the shadow of debt looming over me. Is that too much to ask? To live a life where my art can flourish, unburdened by the harsh realities of survival? But in the end, what is the struggle but part of my symphony? Every note, every chord of hardship, perhaps it will be my legacy. Perhaps the world will understand that I lived for the music, and the music lived for me. Perhaps, in time, my suffering will be acknowledged as the true cost of genius, the price I paid for the privilege of creating something eternal. He pauses, then softly mutters to himself as he returns to his desk, shaking his head with a rueful smile. Ah, but I must play the notes given to me, until the last. Even if they are a mournful melody, even if I am forgotten in the end, my music will remain. Perhaps that is all I can ask for now. That, and the fleeting joy that my work brings to others. In the end, that is what I can leave behind. My music, my gift to the world. And perhaps that is enough. Fade to silence. Section 2. I did not speak to my father for the rest of his life. Ah, my father, a man who crafted me, shaped me from the very first notes I played, from the first breath I took. And yet, for all his efforts, he could never understand me. He could never see the man I became, or the soul within this body of mine. He was determined to turn me into something, into a prodigy, into a success. He taught me to play, to perform, to strive for perfection. Yes, he saw in me the chance to fulfill his own dreams, to redeem his own failed ambitions through me. He was a man who could not separate himself from his ambition. And I was just the instrument through which that ambition could live. He reveled in it. He watched me as though I were a puppet, and he pulled the strings. I was a child prodigy, yes. I traveled the courts of Europe, played for kings and emperors, performed for the aristocracy, all at his command. Every concert, every performance, every bow I took, he stood at my side, like a proud general watching his soldier march into battle. But what was the price of all that glory? What was the cost of his ambition? I was a boy, a mere child, pushed into the limelight, expected to be perfect, to perform with precision, to become the best. And for what? To live up to his expectations? To fulfill his dream of having a son who would conquer the world of music. A dream that was not mine, but his alone. In the silence between our performances, in the hours when the music was no longer the language we spoke, I began to see the truth, the harsh truth. He had no love for the man I would become, no love for the man I was destined to be. His love was conditional, based on my ability to meet his expectations, based on my ability to remain his creation, his perfect son. He did not want me to be free. He did not want me to spread my wings, to find my own way in the world. No, he wanted a puppet, a machine that could play his perfect symphonies, follow his rigid orders, never stray too far from the path he had laid out before me. And when I did leave Salzburg, when I defied him, that was the moment that broke us. I had no choice. I needed to live for myself. I could not continue to live under the weight of his control. But the look in his eyes when I told him I was leaving, the disappointment, the hurt, it struck deeper than any critic's harsh words, deeper than any failure I have ever known. To him, I was nothing more than a disappointment, a son who had betrayed him. He saw only defiance, not the man who sought independence, who wished to create, to live and love on his own terms. It was as if my very existence outside of his control was a personal betrayal. He picks up a letter from the desk, holding it up as if it were a relic from the past. Look at this, a letter from him, written in cold, methodical tones, full of reprimands, full of demands that I return to Salzburg, that I abandon the life I had chosen, the woman I had married. Yes, my marriage to Constance. He spits the words out like they are bitter. A choice that haunted him, a choice he could never forgive. To him, she was not worthy of my love. She was beneath me, but she was my light, the one person who saw me as I truly am, who loved me for the man I was, not for the prodigy he had created. He walks to the window and gazes out, his voice quieter now, tinged with sorrow. He never understood my heart, or perhaps he never tried. He wanted me to be something I was not, a servant to his ambitions, a reflection of his own unfulfilled dreams. But I was not his puppet, no. I was a man with a voice, a man with music inside him, with dreams that could not be bound by his chains. And yet, he never forgave me for it. How could he? I was no longer the boy who played for his pleasure. I was a man who needed to carve his own path, a man who needed to write his own destiny. I tried to explain, to make him see, but my words, my music, they were lost on him. He could never see that I was no longer the boy he had molded, but a man who had to live for himself, a man who had to follow his own heart, to create on his own terms. And when I failed to live up to his expectations, when I followed my heart instead of his orders, he turned his back on me. I thought he would understand. I thought he would see the necessity of my independence. But he didn't. He never did. He collapses back into the chair, exhaustion and grief filling his face. And now he is gone. He left this world, and I never had the chance to reconcile. I never had the chance to tell him, I am not sorry. I am not sorry for who I have become. I only wish he could have seen that, seen the man I was, and not the child he so desperately wanted to control. The man who loved his wife, the man who cared about his music, the man who refused to let his father's ambitions dictate his every move. He wanted me to be what he had envisioned, but I was more than that. I was Mozart. I was a man who needed to live by his own rules. He wipes a tear from his cheek, his voice barely audible. I never asked to be his puppet. I never asked to be the perfect son he could show off to the world. I only wanted to be myself. And I did that, despite the pain, despite the rejection. I wrote my music. I wrote it for me, for my soul, for my heart. I did not write it for anyone else. Not for the emperor, not for my father, not for the court. My music was mine. It was my only freedom. He stands again, his voice filled with quiet resolve, as if finding peace in his words. I am not his puppet. I am not anyone's puppet. I am Mozart, and I will compose my music as I see fit. And though the bitterness remains, though the pain of his absence lingers, I will carry on. For my music is all I have left, and it will always be mine. I will not let his shadow cloud my path any longer. The world will remember me for who I truly was, not for who he wanted me to be. I will not be silenced. He looks up to the heavens, a final tear escaping his eye, and the scene fades to silence. Section 3. I lost 4 of my 6 children. Ah, Constance. He sighs, his hand lightly brushing his brow. How do I begin to explain her? To speak of love, of passion, of devotion. Yet, the burden that comes with it. Ah, how I adored her. My sweet Constance, my muse, the one who captured my heart when I least expected it. A soft smile flickers across his face, quickly replaced by a shadow of sorrow. It was a love that burned bright, too bright, perhaps. I had barely known the taste of true happiness when I saw her, when I heard her laugh, and I knew with a certainty that only the wildest of hearts can know, that she was the one. But love, as it often does, brought with it a torrent of woes. He pauses, his voice growing heavier. The music that flowed from my heart and into the world. That glorious gift. It fed my soul, but it left our lives empty. Empty of wealth, empty of peace. The world demanded of me always more, always more. And yet, what did it leave in return? His hand gestures toward the scattered papers on his desk. Gold? No, only debts. He laughs bitterly, the sound almost hollow. And Constance, my love, my sweet. She stood by me, as I dragged us through every hardship. His voice softens. The late nights, the endless hours of composing, the frustration. The moments when I would forget everything else in the world but the sound of the music. It drove us apart as often as it drew us together. And then there were the children. His expression falters, and his voice trembles. 6, we had 6. Such a miracle, such a blessing, and yet the weight of their tiny lives crushed my heart. Only 2 of them lived to see the light of day, and the others. They died in the cruelest of ways, taken too soon, their voices never to be heard in this world. He pauses, the pain evident in his eyes. I could not save them, no matter how much I wanted to, no matter how hard I tried. And Constance, she bore the weight of it all with me. She too suffered the loss of our children. And yet, there were moments, oh so many moments, when I failed her. He clenches his fists, his voice rising in frustration. I was consumed by my own mind, my own music, my own madness. I would withdraw into myself, locked away with my notes and instruments, and I would forget her love, forget her pain. How could she stand by me with my temper, my unpredictability, he hesitates, my stubbornness? How could she bear it? He sits at the desk, his voice quieting, a sorrowful melancholy in his words. I loved her, I truly did. But love is never simple, never straightforward. It is complicated by dreams unfulfilled, by passions unchecked, by the relentless drive to create, to leave behind something greater than oneself, to sacrifice everything, even the very family you hold dear. How many times did I tell her, I do this for you? How many times did I fail to see that the true sacrifice was not in the music, but in the moments I could not give her? And so we drifted, as we all do, through the storm. He looks up, his eyes distant. There were times, I'll admit, when I thought our marriage would break. And perhaps it should have. But then, there were also moments. He smiles softly, but with sorrow, when the music would fade, and I would look into her eyes, and I would remember why I chose her, why I needed her. In those quiet, fleeting moments, I understood that love was not just a force of passion, but a force that endured despite the storms, despite the pain. But alas, the storms never stopped. His hand falls to the desk, defeated, and I too became lost within them. He looks up again with quiet resolve. What can I say now? That I regret loving her? Never. But I regret the moments lost to my own obsessions. I regret the times I let my music, my genius, blind me to the needs of the one who stood by me when all else was lost. He stands, his voice growing firm again, as if coming to a realization. And yet, Constance, he pauses, a fleeting smile appearing. She is still with me. In the music, in the legacy we created together, through all the trials and all the tears. Our love lives on, even if the world never understood it. Perhaps it is in that very struggle that the beauty lies. He turns away from the desk, as if leaving behind the sorrowful thoughts. Yes, Constance, though the world may not always see us for what we were, I know what you were to me, and I will carry that with me, even through the dark corridors of debt, through the heartache and the loss, even unto my final day. He pauses, as if listening to a distant sound, and his voice softens to a whisper. For in the end, love, true love, is never truly lost. It simply transforms into something immortal, like the music. He stands still for a moment, before the stage fades to darkness, the faint sound of a piano playing softly in the distance. Section 4. I lived only 35 years. He pauses for a moment, his breath heavy, before speaking softly, almost as if talking to himself. Ah! He looks at his hands, trembling ever so slightly. These hands that have shaped symphonies, these hands that have brought forth the most beautiful music the world has yet to hear. How fragile they are, how frail they feel now. He lets out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. I have crafted music that soars, that dances with the heavens. Yet, I cannot escape the prison of my own flesh. He takes a deep breath, steadying himself. It is a cruel irony, is it not? To possess a mind so full of melodies, of harmonies that could make the gods weep, and yet be trapped within a body that betrays you at every turn. For what is talent, what is genius, when the very vessel carrying it falls apart? He looks down, his voice growing quieter, filled with a trace of frustration. From the moment I could remember, my body has never been kind. From childhood, there were pains, fevers, ailments that left me weakened, yet I pushed on. He clenches his fists, pushed on for the music, for the glory, for the recognition. His eyes lift, fiery for a moment, as if remembering his youthful ambitions. I thought I could outrun it, outshine it. All those nights of feverish composing, of playing until my fingers bled, all to escape the ache that was always there. But how could I outrun death itself? He laughs bitterly again, the sound hollow in the silence. Ah, but it is not the death of the body that I fear. It is the death of what was never finished. His voice shakes with emotion. So much music still inside me. So many notes, so many symphonies that could have been. And yet, here I am, a prisoner of this fragile shell. He presses a hand to his chest, his breath shallow. For years I have lived in this constant state of sickness. A body that gives way to fevers and chills. A mind that races but a body that cannot keep up. I thought the pain was simply a shadow that would eventually pass. But now I see it was a reflection of something darker. Stress, worry, poverty. They took their toll on me. They wore me down until I was but a shadow of the man I was meant to be. He pauses, the weight of his words settling in. His eyes are distant, as if looking back on a life that feels already distant, already slipping away. And yet the world did not know me. Not as I wished to be known. Not as I deserved to be known. His voice cracks, and he looks away, almost ashamed. No, my name is not sung from every corner of the earth. My works were not performed in the grandest halls, not in the way I had dreamed. I died in obscurity, in poverty. His voice grows small, as if ashamed of his own fate. What is a genius when he is not understood? What is a life when it is spent in the shadows, unseen and unappreciated? I was a child of the court, yes, a child of luxury, but where is that luxury now? He gestures toward the empty space around him, his hand trembling slightly. My life was one of struggle, of striving to be more than I was allowed to be. A composer of great passion, yes, but a man who could never escape his debts, his frailties. And what of my wife, Constance? He sighs deeply, pain flashing across his face. My poor wife, my sweet Constance, she was left with so little. And my children, my dear children, they will never know their father as they should have. He closes his eyes briefly, as if imagining the life that could have been. They will grow up without me, without my guidance, without the music I should have written for them. His voice softens, filled with an aching resignation. I cannot change the past, nor can I rewrite my fate. I have given all I had, my life, my health, my spirit, to the music. But now the music is all that remains. It is the only thing that will carry me beyond the grave, beyond the dust, beyond the pain. He smiles faintly, a bitter yet peaceful smile, as if accepting his fate. Perhaps that is enough. He laughs softly, almost as if to himself. Perhaps that is enough for a man like me. He looks directly at the audience, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. When I am gone, remember the music. Remember the beauty, the joy, the sorrow that it brings. And perhaps, just perhaps, you will understand me, understand my soul. Not in the way I ever imagined, no, not in that way, but in a way that is timeless, eternal, and beyond the confines of the body. He pauses, taking one last deep breath as the piano music swells softly in the background. So I leave you with this, a legacy not of riches, not of fame, but of music, of sound, of emotion, of life, captured in every note. He steps back, the music continuing, his figure fading slowly into the shadows.